Call of Duty desperately needs a shot in the arm. With sales being reportedly poor for 2021's Vanguard and the series losing 50 million players in the last year, it's clear to see why Activision are putting all their eggs in one basket with this year's Modern Warfare 2. The poorer than average critical reception for both Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard mean that there needs to be a serious improvement in this year's entry in order to win players back. The main issue is, in my opinion, that the last Call of Duty games just haven't taken advantage of the new ground that Modern Warfare broke for them. Black Ops Cold War was a rushed mess that lacked the graphical showcasing of its predecessor, and Vanguard was set in a setting that players simply weren't interested in. It's been a disastrous couple of years for the Call of Duty franchise, so let's take a look at the last few main entries and see what Modern Warfare 2 has to live up to. Modern Warfare 2019 was a huge step forward for the series. The last game in the franchise, Black Ops 4, had released a good critical reviews but fairly average fan reception. The issue was, in my opinion, that Call of Duty was growing stale. The last few entries in the series had all been stunted in their potential for franchise revival by a few issues per game. Infinite Warfare had a good campaign but a universally panned multiplayer. World War II was yet another World War II game that launched just a year after the critically acclaimed Battlefield 1, and Black Ops 4 launched without a signature campaign mode. It was Modern Warfare, hyped up with the reveal of a brand new graphics engine that held all of Activision's hopes for the future of Call of Duty. Soon enough, when Modern Warfare released on October the 25th, 2019, it was a hit with both fans and critics. The work done by the developers at Infinity Ward had paid off. The new engine, in particular, shone. Finally, the series seemed to have caught up with games such as Battlefield in realism, as every weapon was so full of detail you could almost feel them in your hands. Sound design was another thing that had been upgraded significantly. The guns in Modern Warfare sounded incredible, from the animation sounds, to the reloads, to the empty casings clattering on the floor as you fired. The positional audio had a lot to improve on, however, and this would lead to huge problems with Call of Duty Warzone, but that's a separate video. This new game clearly had all the old Call of Duty charm, and it brought fans back, both new and old. Modern Warfare also introduced some different, less traditional game modes to the franchise, which helped elevate it to new heights not seen since the golden days of 2012. If Call of Duty's problem before 2019 was that the series was stale, Modern Warfare's newest modes completely fixed those problems. Ground War was an enormous spectacle of a game mode, similar in structure to a Battlefield match. It definitely helped pull in some Battlefield fans hoping for something more modern than Battlefield 1 or 5. I think that Ground War, while not being my favourite mode to play, was a fantastic addition to the series. With vehicles, increased player counts and huge maps, Ground War felt like an embodiment of the unrealistic chaos that Call of Duty brings to the table. If there was ever an opposite way to play that relied purely on the competitive, well-balanced shooter at Modern Warfare's core, then there was Gunfight. Gunfight took place on smaller, smartly designed maps that relied on team coordination and player skill. It was played out over several rounds with teams of 2 and random weapons every 2 rounds. I personally loved Gunfight. It became my main way to play for over my hours and hours spent with the game. I loved the fast pace and the fair playing field the random weapons provided. Infinity Ward would later expand the mode to include gunfight tournaments, which were multiple rounds of gunfight played against several different teams. I can't remember a time where I've been more competitive playing Call of Duty actually. Playing on such tightly designed maps at a breakneck pace was, and still is, a massive thrill. Overall, Modern Warfare was a massive success, and with the next game being made by both Raven Software and Sledgehammer, it seemed that Call of Duty was in for a very interesting few years. Polish is a hugely important part of what makes a Call of Duty game distinctive from the massive FPS shooters released every year. When a Call of Duty game releases, it's expected that it'll be the very best of the genre. Tight gunplay, impeccable map design, smooth gameplay, and cutting-edge graphics are all things that we expect when a new Call of Duty game releases. That's why every game takes so long to make. Even with a pre-existing engine, most of the groundwork done for gameplay and sound design, and a team extremely familiar with the technology used, it still takes 3 years or more to make, finalise and polish a Call of Duty game. That's why, when Activision announced that Treyarch were taking over from Raven and Sledgehammer a year into development, there was a very real worry from fans that the next Call of Duty would come out rushed. As it turned out, they had every right to worry. Modern Warfare was special because it felt so polished and so perfected. You could feel the love and care of the developers in every footstep, see it in every pristinely rendered environment, and feel it in the kickback of every weapon. They had clearly taken their time to polish and refine Modern Warfare until it was exactly the way they'd intended it. In what became Black Ops Cold War, there was seemingly very little of that polish. The disjointedness of Black Ops Cold War is in the very title of the game. It's far too long, and it doesn't continue the story that we last saw in Black Ops 3. With the rough edges of the title in mind, we turn to the gameplay. After seeing the smoothness of Modern Warfare, the jerky, overly fast, slide-reliant gameplay of Cold War felt like a massive step back. Modern Warfare felt tactical and almost vaguely realistic. Cold War was like a blast from the past, and not in a good way. This was a leap back to the arcade-like experience from the older Call of Duty games, and while those games were beloved for the time, Cold War had needed to show what the new graphics engine could do on next-gen consoles, and it promptly fell flat. The whole game just looked and felt noticeably worse compared to the game that had been released just a year earlier. Even playing Cold War on a next-gen console looked worse than playing Modern Warfare on a last-gen console. For some reason, the game even ran worse. The worst part was that the gameplay felt so much less refined than it had been before. The ridiculously long slide, which got nerfed after the beta but was still ridiculous, felt like something from Advanced Warfare, and for some reason the guns all sounded a lot like they had even previous Black Ops 4. This was a game that had clearly been rushed out of the door and lacked all the polish that we'd loved about Modern Warfare. Fortunately, Black Ops Cold War has more to recommend it than I've just described so far. It has one of the most varied, interesting zombies experiences since Black Ops 3, and the advantage that Cold War has over that game is that none of this wealth of content will cost you a penny. There are several modes to enjoy and numerous maps. If you enjoy zombies, then I'd say this is genuinely the best experience for you outside of Black Ops 3. The first map, Die Maschine, is simple but deep, has a large variety of enemies and a balanced selection of perks. I think that it's perfect for beginners and experts alike, and I played it for round after round when it was first released. In fact, it's still the only zombies mode I've ever played, but I've unlocked diamond camos for multiple weapon types. If you're into a larger, more open game type but still want to experience that zombie thrill, then there's Outbreak, a brand new addition to the series. It's a much larger, open space with goals that get you exploring the map and dealing with huge hordes of enemies. There are also much smaller zombies experiences set in the gunfight maps, which are unique for their franticness even from the very first round. Each field upgrade, weapon type and perk has its own upgrade path as well. It's an expansive zombies experience that I think redeems this game from being a total car crash. The part that drags it down, however, is the multiplayer. It's a huge shame that the Black Ops Cold War multiplayer turned out the way that it did. With an excellent zombies mode, the game could have overcome its technical and design issues to actually be a pretty decent entry in the series. Unfortunately, the multiplayer that we were given at launch was bare bones and lackluster. It launched with only 10 maps, and some of the maps were already clearly unbalanced. The thing is, we'd all seen this coming in the beta, as I played the beta extensively prior to launch. By the time Cold War fully released, the maps were still suboptimal, with basic designs, and gameplay still felt unstable. The MP5 was completely dominant during the beta, and this proved to still be true during full release. Sliding was still an issue, even after Treyarch promised to fix pre-launch. The other thing that was off was that the game just felt almost like a Call of Duty Lite. Let me explain. After the tactical, slower gameplay of Modern Warfare, the quicker match time of Cold War just seems sloppy and casual. Not that there's anything wrong with playing Call of Duty casually, of course, but by casual I mean that it just didn't feel smart in the same way that Modern Warfare had. The decision to make health bars visible to other players also didn't help in this regard. All in all, the multiplayer was a mess, It had far less depth, maps lacked excitement, and there was no gunfight mode at launch. It just didn't feel refined. It was like the game had been built up and prepared, but it never really hit home. In other words, the house was built, but the lights were out for this one. And it was completely up to Vanguard to relight the fire and recapture the magic of Modern Warfare. Let me present you with a very different problem. Call of Duty Vanguard is a competent, smoothly running, graphically strong shooter with a strong visual identity and a theme that runs throughout. The problem here is that inexplicably, Activision decided to go for a World War II setting. On the surface, this might not seem like a problem, as World War II is a historic setting with great potential for storytelling. The issue is that just 4 years ago, Call of Duty World War II used exactly the same setting, albeit a little earlier in the war. It's not just Call of Duty that have used this setting in recent years, however, as Battlefield 5 was also set in World War II, and that released just 3 years before. My point is that Activision clearly misread the room on this one. There was no appetite for another World War II shooter, and after Black Ops Cold War brought a lukewarm response, Vanguard sales tanked. If you go to play Modern Warfare or Black Ops Cold War, you'll find players still playing it at an extremely high level even years after they first launched. This is because the multiplayer in Modern Warfare, and particularly the zombies in Cold War, are still beloved to many players in the community. It's been years since I saw a Call of Duty game receive less love than Vanguard. It's not even like there was a particularly large hate for the game. It's like it just exists, and the fans were just waiting for the next game in the series. I can't say that Vanguard is particularly bad, it's just bland. I could say that Infinite Warfare had serious problems, or that Ghost was flawed in a lot of ways, but with Vanguard there's no huge design flaw really. It simply just isn't interesting. The biggest problem with Vanguard is that its elements just don't combine well. It's cinematic and paints itself as an epic war story. What I won't deny is that I do like some of the more cinematic elements added to it. The short character introductions that play before play of the game reels and the MVP system are things that I appreciate. The issue is that this conflicts with how the game actually plays. When I think of the World War II period, I think of clunky manual guns and heavy footsteps. Vanguard plays smoothly, but it's almost too smooth. It's missing those big sound design hinging elements that would have really created the immersion that it searches for. Footsteps feel light, gunshots are almost muted, and reloads simply just don't have that crunch that symbolises the manual reloading of a weapon. Looking back at my gameplay footage, even the graphics are somewhat muted, with various shades of brown littering the battlefield and no standout moments. Some of Cold War's maps had real style by the end, with uniquely bizarre elements to them. Over all my time spent with Vanguard, I can only remember a couple of maps that really stood out to me. I do like the way the games are split into separate pacings, such as Blitz for higher player count modes, but the map design creates serious issues with this. I don't think that I've played a Call of Duty since Ghosts that seems to reward camping in the same way that Vanguard does. With a rapid time to kill and fast firing weapons, the large maps that Vanguard's multiplayer is played on feel almost tailored to campers. It's never been so frustrating to be spawn camped, and speaking of spawning, I can't remember a time where the developers got it so wrong. Spawning in Vanguard feels like Russian roulette. You never know if you're going to live more than 5 seconds, and it just feels like the consequence of bad design. Speaking of, we have the zombies mode. My god. At launch, this was the worst, least replayable, and most tradition-breaking zombies mode ever created. Nowadays it's definitely better, but it still lacks the charm of almost any previous zombies mode. It could be partly due to the weapons, but there just doesn't seem to be as much variety in Vanguard Zombies, with all the maps feeling very similar. This goes back again to the basic colour palette of Vanguard, even if I do like the glowing reds that go with the more mystical zombies this time around. The bottom line of Vanguard is that while the game functions, it's so empty of ambition and originality that it just doesn't feel worthy of your time or your money. Out of every new idea it brought forward, the only two that I can think of that I'd like to see in the future are the MVP screen and Champion Hill. That's an incredibly short list for such a massive game, and also leaves Call of Duty as a series in an incredibly awkward position. Call of Duty is in a seriously difficult position. After 2 releases in a row that were received from lukewarmly to poorly, the next game has to reach expectations. In fact, it has to do more than that. Modern Warfare 2 has to simultaneously be better than both Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard, and it also has to improve on what Modern Warfare was supposed to start. It can't be too different, as players have lacked an up-to-standard Call of Duty game for a couple of years now, but it can't be too run-of-the-mill, as we've just had Vanguard, the most run-of-the-mill FPS game imaginable. Modern Warfare 2 has to balance on a tightrope, and it desperately needs to not overbalance, as it's reportedly the only Call of Duty game until 2024. I do think that it being the only release does allow it some breathing room for development over the next couple of years, but in order for that to happen, it needs to first be the game we've waited 3 years for. Having played the beta, I do think that it's on its way to doing that, but I can't make a full judgment until it releases in a few weeks. I haven't included Warzone in this video, as that's an even more complicated affair that I want to talk extensively about before the release of Warzone 2.0 this November. There's a lot riding on Modern Warfare 2, and after the last couple of releases, I don't think that I'm the only one wondering where Call of Duty goes next if it doesn't land. Thank you for watching, take care, and have a good one.